You are listening to NQA's Sustainability Simplified, your go-to podcast for all your sustainable verification and certification needs.
Hello everybody and welcome to this in the next episode of the NQA Sustainability Simplified podcasts. You're joined today by myself, Stephen Burt, the Carbon and Sustainability Services Director at NQA. And I'm also joined by my colleague and friend, Huw Williams, who works for Auditel. Nice to see you, Huw.
Nice to see you, Steve. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. Welcome.
Thank you.
So Huw works for Auditel. I'll let Huw expand a little more on, the services that Auditel provide. But the relationship that we have, Huw and Auditel are one of NQA's associate partnership program partners, which means Auditel are a trusted consultancy network who NQA work closely with. NQA being an independent third-party verification body and certification body, provide the certification and the verification services to all kinds of different clients. Huw is on the other side of the fence to some extent. He's a consultant providing assistance, help, guidance to all kinds of different clients with all things carbon, all things greenhouse gases, and perhaps some other bits and pieces as well. So I'm really pleased to have Huw join us today because he's got a wealth of expertise in all these things. He can give us some information from the consultant's perspective rather than what you might normally hear from myself as the auditor's perspective. So Huw, do you want to give us an overview maybe of perhaps your own background a little bit, how you got into the carbon side of things, maybe a bit of information about, some of the background and experience amongst your colleagues as well, and then the wider Auditel network itself.
Yeah, great. So I've been involved with carbon accounting now for 4 years, completely retrained in my early 50s to do this, as I had a passion for sustainability and could see the net zero problem that the UK was having as well as globally. So I got involved. I trained myself up as a carbon accountant, and now I'm a principal carbon accountant and an internal verifier with the Auditel network, which means that I head up a team internally that do all the quality checks and the materiality checks on carbon footprints that are conducted within the network before they're released to the client or go to NQA for third-party independent verification. So the job basically involves working with businesses, helping them to decipher their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and basically come up with a meaningful and as accurate as possible carbon footprint from which we can build robust reduction plans from putting them on a journey to reduce their carbon between now and 2050. The wider Auditel network is involved in procurement as well. So we're basically a carbon management and procurement network, and we're a network of around 140 different businesses that all come together under the Auditel network, and we have skill sets right the way across carbon and procurement. Yeah. That's basically us, Steve.
And ever growing as well, not just your own business, Huw. I see, you're regularly employing new people and bringing new talent into the business. But Auditel itself, regularly on LinkedIn, there's new carbon and procurement consultants joining Auditel, and it seems to be a kind of rapidly growing network of carbon gurus.
Yeah, it is. Ourselves down here in Cardiff, in South Wales, we've built it up over the last 4 years. We're now a team of 6 full-time carbon accountants, and our offices here in Cardiff, we just specialise completely in carbon management, carbon accounting, and reduction planning. So that business has grown exponentially over the last 4 years, and we're heading for another growth year in the year to come as well, which is great.
Excellent, fantastic. Yeah, I think I've always personally found the Auditel experience when we audit or verify Auditel's clients' carbon data. I've always found it to be very strong, very robust, very credible. The approach you take is at Auditel is certainly one of people who know what they're doing, and I've seen the business benefits for your clients firsthand in receiving that advice. So you guys are doing a great job. And as I mentioned before, there are some real carbon gurus in Auditel. Do you count yourselves amongst them? There's some people that know it inside out with bags of experience. But do you consider yourself a carbon guru yet?
I wouldn't consider myself a carbon guru. I think we're all learning all the time, to be honest. It's a very, very changeable space at the moment as things get better, as things get more accurate, as methodologies get better, the way we work. At the end of the day, we have an ethos down here in Cardiff, and that is details matter, and we want to get it as accurate as possible. And we dig deep, and we make no apology to our clients who are being quite annoying at times to get better data from them. But it's the end result that we want, and we want the end result to be one of a usable carbon footprint. It's the old saying, isn't it? You can't reduce what you can't measure. So we've got to measure it first. So we've got to get that right before we can actually come up with robust and meaningful carbon reduction plans. But I'll take the compliment, Steve. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a fast-moving field. There's many new standards coming. They're regularly changing, but I think 2025 will be a particularly exciting year for you and I in terms of all things carbon. Specifically, I've seen the rapid uptake of the PAS 2080 specification, which is the carbon in buildings and infrastructure specification, focused on the construction industry, focused on, infrastructure organizations like, highways and that type of thing. But one of the most exciting things that I can see or two of the most exciting things I can see happening this year is the uptake of ISO 14068-1, which was launched at the back end of 2023, actually, but the uptake seems to be happening this year, which is the international standard for the transition to net zero. It's a stepping stone towards net zero via carbon crediting programs. And the other very exciting prospect that I can see this year will come at November's COP meeting, the Coalition of Parliaments meeting, when at that meeting they're intending to launch a brand new ISO standard for net zero. And because that will be the first international standard for how to achieve net zero within, management system requirements, I think that will be a biggie. I think there'll be a lot of companies are going to be interested in that one as well. And of course, we've also got CBAM as well, which isn't something that I'm overly involved with. CBAM, I am obviously involved in the ISO standards and the developing ISO standards. But let's just talk through those three things first and just get any feedback. So do you want to start with CBAM? What's been your involvement with that so far, and what's involved with CBAM?
Well, the carbon border adjustment mechanism was brought in by the EU in 2024 with a view to it actually going live in 2026. They're in a transition period at the moment where things are being tested, and it basically means you're looking at avoiding carbon leakage. So the EU are saying basically if you manufacture or you buy a raw material from outside of the EU and you bring it into the EU, then you're effectively importing carbon. And that needs to be addressed. So, the carbon border adjustment mechanism is basically geared towards making importers think twice about buying product from high carbon countries and trying to keep it in, because there is a tax involved with it at the end of the day. It's all basically governed by the emission trading scheme. So it depends on what the price of carbon is at this particular week in time is how much tax you'll pay per ton of carbon that you're importing. And so there's a lot of work to do on CBAM. It's been launched early. There's still an awful lot of materials out there that don't have environmental product declarations or any idea of how much carbon is in them from a manufacturing process right the way through. So there's default numbers being used, which are going to end up to be quite expensive. And the UK are looking to launch our CBAM in 2027.
Yeah.
Auditel quite busy at the moment doing workshops for businesses. We run half-day workshops, which means we can sit down with the finance team, the operations team, and procurement teams, and actually, lay out to them exactly what CBAM is all about, how it could affect them, what products that they use might be affected by it, and then we can also work with companies to on the reporting side as well, because the reporting is quite intricate and quite extensive, and of course when you do submit your report, it should be verified. So it has to go through a verification process as well. So again, it is another cost for businesses, unfortunately, but it's all about keeping carbon leakage to a minimum.
Absolutely. So, UK businesses who import into the EU, because I think the EU itself will lead the way. It's likely to be, if I understand you correctly, 2026, when a UK business who are exporting into the EU will need to be able to declare, to quantify and to declare the embodied carbon in certain products that they export into the EU. And they'll be subject to carbon taxation based on the embodied carbon figure at the border, hence the name, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, I guess. And am I right to say the UK version of CBAM, you mentioned it will be 2027, and that will work in just the reverse, I guess. Anything that a company out with the UK wants to import into the UK, it will work more or less in the same manner.
Yeah, the responsibility lies with the importer. So at the moment with the EU CBAM, it's the importers in the EU that are bringing the product in, are the ones that have to report on it and that have to basically pay the tax. But the company that's exporting from, say, the UK into the EU has got to provide all the details and the carbon content. So, although it's the onus is on the importer, the details have all got to come from the exporter. That's the way it works, really. So yeah, it's when it comes in 2027, there's still consultation going on around the UK CBAM. So we don't have any definitive guidelines as yet. We're watching the space very closely so that we can learn about it, so that we can educate businesses basically in plenty of time for when it's launched.
Yeah, exciting times. It's it's the way that the policies tend to move. It's fiscal policies that are driving this kind of thing, carbon these days, which is from my personal point of view, it's a welcome thing, I think. And are there particular materials which are subject to CBAM, or is it everything?
No, it's not everything. You're looking at the major sort of high carbon intensity materials such as concrete, steel, cast iron, aluminium. Fertilizers are included in the EU CBAM, but it's all governed by the CN code of the product that's being exported to Europe. So basically, any business that really wants to know if they are liable to CBAM should have been contacted by the importer that's buying it from them in the EU already. If they haven't and they want to prepare, then they can run their CN codes through the EU CBAM website and be able to see off from that website whether they're actually liable on any products they're selling. A completed product, for instance, like a wood burning stove, cast iron wood burning stove, isn't liable to CBAM. However, if you buy any spare parts in cast iron for that stove, that would be liable for CBAM.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. So that's one thing on the horizon, I guess, that you guys are working hard on. I mentioned at the next COP meeting, they'll launch the net zero standard. Now, I have searched and searched and searched, and I've found very little information on what that's going to look like.
That makes two of us, Steve.
Obviously, ISO have their own net zero. It's kind of guidelines that they have at the minute, which were published a year or two ago. So I'm super excited to be able to see what that's going to look like. I guess it will rely on ISO 14064-1, which is the international standard for quantifying and reporting carbon. It's very likely to point to that as the methodology to use to do that piece of it. And then I think I see signs in ISO 14068-1, which is the transition to net zero carbon neutrality standard, where they require things like carbon neutral pathways, which ultimately lead to net zero. So I can almost picture this new standard as being a bit of a blend of those two with quite a lot more added in around science-based targets and that sort of thing. But you've not had any insight into that as I haven't either. Yeah.
No, I my thought process is very much similar to yours.
Yeah.
ISO do tend to use the frameworks and skeletons of other standards in the same sort of area to sort of build new standards. So I'm expecting it to be along the lines of 14064-1 and 14068. But no, I can't find anything on it either at the moment. And
yeah.
it's interesting. But to give an ISO standard for achieving net zero by 2050 as an option, other than joining SBTI or something like that, I think is a great idea, because having an international standard behind you, it's just making sure that you get it verified correctly. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you know what? I am long enough in the tooth that when I was doing my degree, I think it was back in the early 90s, I did my honours project on the draft international ISO 14001, the Environmental Management System Standard. And at that time, it hadn't been published yet. And at that time, it was just a draft. And I remember thinking at the time, this is going to become something that loads of companies are going to need. This may well become something that companies will need to remain in business, to remain competitive and to win contracts. And I'm in the same frame of mind now with this net zero standard. I anticipate it in time becoming something that will be a mandatory requirement in the same way as ISO 9001 is, or ISO 14001 is, for quite a lot of business success. When I say mandatory, I don't mean mandatory as in regulatory. I mean mandatory as in companies will volunteer to do it, but they'll kind of have to do it if they want to remain successful. It's going to be a biggie, I think, that one.
Yeah, I think it is, absolutely. And I mean, I think a lot of companies at the moment, a lot of organizations, especially ones we work with, are, although we do everything in line with a standard, we don't do anything outside of the standard guidelines. I think at the moment companies are waiting until they get better results from their carbon footprint, in other words, the data being better quality before they actually are going for standards. It's good in a way, but I think what companies need to do is understand what data they need, and then work hard to put their systems in place and processes in place to actually turn out the right data that is needed for carbon, and then standards are going to be a lot easier to achieve for them. With the guidance of consultancies like ourselves, we get lots of people who don't understand. We do an ISO 14064-1 carbon inventory, and they don't understand it. So then we have to convert it back to GHG protocol language just to allow them to understand what it is that they've done, which is fine. It's not an issue, but I think we need to train organizations as we go along how to read a 14064-1 carbon inventory and what it means, because it is quite different, as you know, to the way the GHG set everything out. So but this is all an education process. I think, the idea is, from our point of view, is we want to learn about things, become very proficient in them, and then pass that education on. And that's the important thing, I think. One of our clients are working with a big client in logistics at the moment. They're a global company, and they have massive presence in the UK. And instead of doing their carbon inventory for them, we're working with them for 3 years to redo their processes, get their data in order, teaching them how to collect the data, analyze it, fill the gaps. So we're basically teaching them how to become carbon accountants themselves, so that they can actually do this and then send it straight out for external verification. And that's great. And it's really good fun. I really enjoy that side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We have this. You mentioned the greenhouse gas protocol and the categories around it, and we've got the same experience. We do ISO 14064-1 verifications all the time, and just occasionally we issue verification opinion statements using ISO 14064-1 categories and subcategories, and just occasionally a client will come back to us and say, could you just put that down in terms of the greenhouse gas protocol categories. And you've written there direct emissions and indirect emissions. Can you call that scope 1, 2, and 3, please? I mean, the terminology from the greenhouse gas protocol, it's just ingrained in everybody's minds.
It is. I mean, another example I'll give you. One of our largest client, they're a massive organisation, 1.5 billion turnover. We did their 14064-1 inventory. Then we did their reduction plan in 14064-1. We had a meeting with the board, and then they came back to us and said, can you put this into GHG protocol so the board can understand it, please? You know, I think it's, you know, GHG protocol did a really good job of making it very easy to understand. And, you know, ISO have sort of complicated a little bit, but at the end of the day, none of us know what, I'm on the GHG Management Institute, so I get all the updates of what the new GHG protocol is aiming to do, but none of us have actually seen what it's going to be. I believe 2026 is when it's going to come out. So, you know, it'd be interesting to see what the changes are and whether ISO will accept it, of course, because at the moment the GHG protocol isn't accepted by ISO as a methodology. So
yeah, well, I sit on the BSI committee who provide input to ISO when they author greenhouse gas standards and environmental management standards, actually. And you know, I did ask a question once, you know, why don't you use the term scope 1, 2, and 3, that type of thing? And it's because of the normative references that they include in ISO standards. So the normative references are where they reference another document, which is a mandatory consideration or a mandatory thing to build into the management system. And if you look at ISO 14064-1, they can't consider the GHG protocol to be a normative document because they're not in control of it, and therefore they can't be absolutely certain that next year it won't change dramatically and their ISO standard will be no longer as relevant because it's referring to a document which has changed. So that's the reasoning behind the different terminology, the different categories. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out the correspondence between the two. It's relatively straightforward. It's just that it's ingrained in people's head.
Yeah, I always say it's down to two things, isn't it? Education and the willingness to learn the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's like...
So the other thing that we mentioned there was ISO 14068-1, which is the relatively new standard for the transition to net zero using carbon neutrality. So we at NQA, you know, we were involved in PAS 2060 verifications, which was the old 2014 publicly available specification for carbon neutrality. It was getting a bit creaky around the edges, that specification. You know, it was as the world moved on in terms of terminology and thoughts around carbon neutrality, it was getting a bit creaky. So we're working with our clients now on verifications, and as they move from PAS 2060 to ISO 14068-1. Cards on the table, not all of them are doing it. You know, it's not something necessarily that every client's choosing to do, but we're still doing quite a lot of them. It's a strong standard, in my opinion, because it's aligned with net zero. It's got much more robust and credible requirements around the carbon crediting programs that are involved. It's obviously got a different hierarchy where carbon reductions and then carbon removals are required ahead of the actual offsetting process itself. So I think there's value in it, certainly, and our clients are gaining value from doing so. But have you found yourselves working around that standard at all much?
We've got a number of clients, as you know, Steve, who've achieved PAS 2060 for more than 1 year as they've gone through the last few years with us. We've sort of pre-warned everyone that they need to swap over to 14068. At the moment, we've got I think one client who has definitely said that they will continue and do 14068 in their next reporting period. But yeah, I think when when you look at the way the standard has been built, and I must admit, I totally agree with the way the standard works. The fact that you need to show that reduction, rather than just a declaration of commitment to making a reduction, which, as we know, past 2060 required through its QES, its qualified explanatory statement. I think it's good that you have to do a year, you have to show a reduction on that baseline year, then you can apply.
Yeah,
I think that's the right thing to do. So I'm not against that at all. And for businesses to achieve these reductions these days, every business wants to grow, and that's just natural. So to actually come up with good intensity metrics and show a reduction on those intensity metrics, and actually be able to show in a table where you've reduced your carbon is a really good thing, I think, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the clue's in the name with that one. It's it is called the transition, or transition to net zero part 1. So obviously we can anticipate future part 2s, maybe the net zero standard, who knows, and maybe even more than that in time. But it's a stepping stone. It's transition to help with the transition towards net zero for clients. So yeah, we've seen some real successes with that one. We've also had just 1 or 2 clients, I think, who were past 2060 verified with us, and because they'd done all the work, they already had their greenhouse gas inventory, they already had their carbon data all gathered together, they've got their reduction programs in place, who decided, instead of moving on to ISO 14068-1, to instead look at ISO 14064-1, because they've already done 80% of that with the getting the carbon data together. It's the reporting side of it that's different, the maintenance side of it that's different to some extent. But that's been something we've seen in a couple of occasions as well. Any of your clients moved in that direction, or thinking of moving in that direction?
Yeah, I think the advice we give clients, when we sit down with clients and we launch a project, they've never done this before. They're sat in there, they're quite anxious about the process and the resource that's going to be required and that sort of thing. And the advice that I always give to every client is look, let's get your carbon inventory done first, and then see where we are.
Yep.
But ISO 14064-1 is the route that I always recommend if they're going to go down that route. And the reason for that is, sometimes when it comes to making commitments to carbon reductions, you're looking at capital spend. And to buy offsets to make yourself carbon neutral, you're spending money that you could spend on making further reductions. That's the way I look at it. So, I'll say, a client might say to me, well, it'll cost us 100,000 to offset. And we go, right, okay, well, how much is it going to cost you to put solar on the roof to supply 35 to 40% of your energy? About 120 grand. So you're prepared to throw 100,000 offset in, want to throw 120 grand at it and put some solar on the roof, save yourself some money and reduce your carbon at the same time.
Yeah.
So, I think for me, carbon neutrality is something that sometimes stops clients from making reductions that they could make. They've got carbon neutrality, they don't need anything else. Whereas what we want is people to reduce their carbon, not just kick the can down the road.
Yeah, it's a mindset thing, isn't it? I think for some clients, particularly those larger ones where they end up with a sort of cost benefit analysis to do between investing in carbon crediting programs or investing in energy efficient technologies for themselves directly, and then weighing up the benefits between reducing their own even further than they would do otherwise, or carbon removal credits or carbon offset credits further down the road. So it's a balance. I guess every company is unique in the decision-making process that they have, but certainly, both Auditel and NQA are well placed to guide companies down the road in the right direction.
Absolutely. To me, it's about getting that. It's about getting that stamp of approval. That I wish more clients would go through the third-party verification process and achieve something like ISO 14064-1, because it's that credibility that's behind it with third-party verification.
Yeah,
And there's lots of companies out there that, I mean, that do a limited assurance quality check on what they put out, and lots of other companies have these little badges. I mean, Auditel is totally against giving any client a badge, because unless they go out and get it third party independently verified, it's the only way to actually get an unbiased view of how accurate and how compliant that inventory is.
Yep.
So, I always encourage people, if they want to go and shout about it from the rooftops and get a badge, then go for an ISO 14064-1 standard. Simple as that.
And it's that old adage, not marking your own homework. That's what really what it all boils down to at the end of the day. It adds that extra level of credibility, and because we've got the UCAS accreditation for ISO 14064-1 and PAS 2060 and so on, we ourselves are subject to audits from our accreditation bodies throughout the world, actually. Which just raises the bar and keeps it as credible as possible.
Well, there's an example there, Steve. One of our clients that you did a PAS 2060 audit on, and you discovered that there was 150 deliveries that they hadn't declared to us.
Yeah, that's
right. So again, you see, this is it. You're doing a third-party independent audit, so you're up there going through their systems, which we can't do. We have to rely on the data that they tell us is complete.
Yeah, so it's just it wasn't intentional on the client's part either. It was just one of those, so much data to look at that they'd missed that one. But yeah, you're right. That's a great example of the value in it.
Oh, absolutely.
So, what kind of challenges then are you facing, or your clients facing? I mean, that was a good example there. They're providing you with the data, Auditel. You don't do the job for them. You provide that helping hand, you provide them with guidance, you provide them with expertise and often the competencies that they need to do it, which is always something I admire in the approach that Auditel take. I can sit down in front of a managing director and a client that you guys work with, and the managing director, often you or somebody very close to the managing director role, has been involved and knows the process and can speak the lingo, the carbon lingo, all that sort of thing. And that's a great sign that you don't just go in, do it all for them, give them a report and a carbon inventory and walk away again and hand them over to us. That's a good sign of the approach that you have.
I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes to carbon accounting, lots of businesses believe they have the data and they have the right data. 95% of the time they don't. The biggest part of what we do is analyze the data they give us and spot errors and gaps and and all these things that can throw a carbon footprint out. It's basically, we have a really good record. Everything that we do, as you know, goes through our internal audit before it goes out to a client.
Yeah.
So we issue. I head up the verification team with Mark Miller at Auditel, and we issue a not verified with comments, or a verified opinion statement with every single carbon footprint that we do. And testament to the amount of effort that's put in correcting the data. 47% of our baseline reports last year got a verified with comments or above.
Right. Okay. Wow. Okay.
So, because our governance, we know exactly what we get, and that is unusual, because a baseline report, the first year a company gets involved with this, is usually the poorest report they're going to get.
Yeah.
But if you keep asking questions, if you keep trying to get better data, and the company embrace the project and start to dig and get the better data themselves, you get a better result in year one. Simple as that. It's all about. We're committed to doing it right. The organization has to be just as committed to getting us the right data so that we can do it right. And, testament to the guys that I work with here, we have a big thing here in the office. It just says details matter, data matters, drive to improve. And that's what we do. It's just getting that better data quality all the time.
Yeah, and you're dead right actually about the baseline year. Getting that as close to correct as it possibly can be so important, because
Yeah,
companies, as they progress on their journey to net zero, they'll be consistently comparing their current performance to what their baseline year performance was. There's the opportunity to re-baseline as they go, should things change significantly, in terms of what the business does, or various other reasons. But getting that baseline right, it allows them to set themselves science-based targets, for example, and measure their progress as they move towards net zero.
yeah.
One of the big challenges I foresee in the future is going to be when companies require carbon removals to enable them to continue on their journey. So, any company can reduce their carbon. Some companies might even be able to reduce their carbon emissions right down until, only residual emissions remain. But the advancement of carbon removal technologies I can see as being a hurdle in the near future. It's coming on quickly, but it's not, in my opinion, coming on quite quickly enough. Obviously, we've got another 25 years in the UK until the net zero, the country's net zero target is to be achieved. So we've got 25 years of technological development and nature-based solution developments to take place. But I've only seen to date limited evidence of effective use of carbon removals, either technologies or nature-based solutions, with the clients that we've worked with. Have you seen much experience around that, or any information around that?
No, not around removals as such. I mean, like you say, it's 25 years left, and you and I both know 25 years goes by pretty quickly. However, on the other side of that, we know what changes have taken place over the last 25 years.
That's it. Yeah.
Hindsight. Yeah. Sometimes you watch an old program from in the 90s, and you realise that mobile phones needed to be carried around in a wheelbarrow, or we've come a long way in the last 25 years, and I've got no doubt that we'll come a long way in the next 25 years. And that's one of the things we say to clients when it comes to reduction. Stop sitting there and panicking. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Technology is going to come to help us. Let's do what we can to reduce emissions on an annual basis, even if it's only small, but embracing the technology as it becomes available to us. We spend a lot of time with businesses analysing their fleets, for example, and we'll do a full fleet analysis and say, right, these vehicles can swap to electric right now because they're not doing any more mileage per day than can be charged up overnight for. So you could swap all these vehicles to EVs right now. These vehicles, however, you're going to have an issue with. And I think there's some of the larger companies out there may remain nameless, but they do broadband and telephone. Bought a load of vehicles on EVs, and their engineers are spending in the car park across the road from our offices probably 2 or 3 hours out of their day recharging their vehicles. So they're losing productivity because they bought the wrong vehicles, or they've put electric vehicles on routes. So you've got to do that analysis. You've got to get it right. And that's one of the things that we do a lot with clients, is actually start to sit down and analyze where they can actually make these savings that are not going to have a detrimental effect on productivity within a business, which is really important.
Yeah, it's important to, I guess, time it right in the jump for technology as well. I've never been an early adopter of anything technological in my personal life.
I do it straight away. I'm the guy that paid $6,000 for a TV that became this now you can buy for $350. Yeah, I bought an electric car as soon as they came out. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a Scotsman. I'm too tight to do that. I wait until the market settles down and the prices come down, and then I'll think about it. Yeah, I was one of the last of my group of friends to own a mobile phone, for example. That sort of thing. But but having said that, I've had a fully electric car for 4 years, and prior to that, I had, I think, 2 hybrids, maybe even 3 hybrids, plug-in one as well. I mean, I've lived with them very well. And the life that I lead as somebody that's on the road often, I do fairly high mileages. I haven't been stuck at the side of the road yet, but I have spent significant amount of time at those charging stations, maybe even the ones outside your office.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a couple of years ago, I remember when I first got mine, which is coming up to 3 years ago now, full EV. And, I was queuing at service stations for an hour just to get on a charger. I don't have that problem anymore.
No,
I don't think I've queued in 12 months for a charger at any service station.
Me neither. It's like night and day. When I got my car 4 years ago, you'd get to a service station and there might be 2 50 kilowatt units, and that would be about it, with a queue around them and one of them broken. Now you get to the service stations on the M6 and the M1 and things. In fact, I was at one the other day and it had 22 350 kilowatt chargers all just sitting there, plenty room, plenty space, middle of the day, busy time, all that stuff. So yeah, it's a much more enjoyable experience than it used to be. That's for sure. And just on the topic of low carbon technologies then, so have you seen, certainly one of the clients that you provided consultancy for and NQA provided the verification for, did some quite clever things around solar panels, and battery storage technology was a clever part of it, and balancing their loads and charging their cars and all that kind of thing. But have you seen any particularly innovative examples of the use of technology in helping your clients reduce carbon?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of technology out there, and it's finding the right things to put in place. I mean, we've partnered up with a Scottish-based company who do digital twinning, which has been a fantastic addition to our portfolio. And we have clients now who digitally twin their buildings, and this twinning technology is so clever that you can put in scenarios to it. So you can say, I'm going to put solar in. What difference is that going to make? How much carbon is it going to save? How much money is it going to save? I'm going to put building management system in. What's that going to do? And we had one situation the other day where a client wanted to put drop curtains in because they felt they were losing a lot of heat from the doors being open. So they ran the scenario through, and it turned out it wasn't worth the investment. So this is the sort of thing that's really come. This sort of technology is leading, leading the way now with large, especially with larger businesses with big buildings that are basically oozing carbon emissions and losing energy all over the place. But absolutely. One of our clients involved in manufacturing, and they manufacture carbon fiber, and they're currently looking at R&D into the future where they can change the way that carbon fiber is stored and stuff like that. So there's loads of things going on that not necessarily that is out there in the marketplace, but is being developed by companies who want to do something about it for their own businesses. So there's a lot of we have lots of conversations, especially with manufacturers who are looking at ways in which they can reduce their carbon through changing their processes in designing processes and things. We have another company. They make I mustn't use the word polystyrene because they keep telling me off for that. It's not polystyrene, but it's a very similar product. But they had a situation where they have a huge tank of hot water, which is heated by a gas boiler the size of an 18-ton truck. And every Monday morning, they used to use an inordinate amount of gas to get this water back up to temperature. So they put a huge solar array on the roof to supply their electricity, and then decided that the grid told them they couldn't take all this excess electricity that's being used over the weekend, created over the weekend. So they put an electric element into the tank so that the solar was keeping the tank at a much warmer temperature. So on a Monday morning, then the gas boiler didn't work so hard to heat the tank up to where it needs. So these are companies that are thinking for themselves, which is which I think
takes a bit of thought, doesn't it? Yeah,
I think that's where a lot of the revolution around carbon reduction is going to come from, is businesses actually thinking about how they can change their processes and designing a lot of their own stuff to make that happen.
Absolutely.
I think that's going to happen.
We're doing increasing numbers of verifications against PAS 2080 these days. I mentioned it previously, the carbon in buildings and infrastructure, carbon management buildings and infrastructure. that is a powerful tool. I know you personally, but many of your colleagues in Auditel are involved in it to a high extent. And I have, over the last year or so, been out doing PAS 2080 verifications for NQA's clients, and it is a powerful tool. It's about whole life carbon in a building or in a piece of national infrastructure like a road or a bridge or a railway or whatever, power station, whatever it might be. And it's all about considering the carbon from essentially the concept stage all the way through to the eventual dismantling stage of that particular building or asset, and everything in between, you know, the design of it, the construction of it, the use of it, the operation of it, the occupancy of it, through to, you know, designing for refurbishment, all the way through to the dismantling. And there's considerations around all kinds of different areas, not just carbon. It thinks about things like land use change and biodiversity impacts and social impacts and so on. But I have seen some clever technologies being used around those projects, and often the building owner or the asset owner manager will be happy to pay more for low carbon opportunities during, for example, the construction process or the use process. So I've seen some really clever things like use of low carbon cements. And the EPDs, the environmental product declarations, have a much lower carbon for those things because they're using waste products within them. Low carbon asphalt, for example, I've seen asphalt going down on roads which has got components from shredded lorry tires that would otherwise go to waste. I've seen fantastic examples of circular economy. So I went and saw two buildings getting pulled down and one new building going up in its place, right in the city centre. And the contractor invited in all these third sector organisations to go round the old buildings first and make an inventory of what they would like. So the old radiators, the old boilers, the old HVAC systems, the fixtures, the fittings in the building slowly got taken away for reuse by all these third sector organisations. So yeah, I think certainly the low carbon technologies that I've seen being used and driven by PAS 2080, the energy efficiency technologies that get built into the buildings themselves and the assets themselves, and thinking beyond that to the end of life and designing it for end of life, if you like. PAS 2080 has been a really powerful tool, and I think it will drive forward those low carbon technologies.
I agree. I think. Yeah, I got involved with PAS 2080 back in 2020, 2021, late 21, 22. And we were approached by a very large a construction organisation who specialise. They had a massive highways division, and they were, at the time, they were a team of one looking at PAS 2080, and we did a big scoping exercise. A team of 5 of us went in and we did a complete scoping exercise. We did a deep dive into their systems, and we wrote them a 60-odd page report on what they needed to do to actually change the business to be able to report and to verify to PAS 2080. And that was a really good experience because we were, you know, we learned about PAS 2080, and now we were using it in anger, which was great. And you know, they're now a team of 18, and they're actually doing it, which is fantastic. You know, it gives you a warm feeling. But you know, so you know, I think at the end of the day, you know, we're very close to the Highways Agency. The chap in charge of PAS 2080 at Highways Agency lives about 20 minutes from this office, and he's very very good and very keen and very helpful. And I think a lot of companies that are involved with highways, you know, should approach him because he's a good guy and he talks sense. And Highways Agency are very, very helpful with with suppliers to get through this. So, but I think, rolling it out now to more construction, I think is the right thing to do. And these days houses should be looking to be built in a way where they're passive, if you like, and self-sufficient. Why not run it on?
Big part of the design process now, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely, and it should be.
Yeah, I mean, NQA's experience of PAS 2080, which I hadn't initially anticipated, only half of the clients are actually building infrastructure. The other half are building buildings, which are, not part of infrastructure as per the National Infrastructure Plan.
Yeah.
So, we've experienced it as a kind of 50-50 thing, 50% buildings, 50% infrastructure. And if you'd asked me, a year or two ago what I thought that might look like, I would have thought we would be 95% infrastructure projects and only maybe 5% general building construction projects. So it's great to see it being rolled out, not just in the infrastructure side of things, but through general building construction projects as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, PAS 2080 is great. It's part of the family, along with 14064-1, 14068-1, PAS 2060 as it currently is, and these standards are important standards, and it's right to promote them, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool ISO man, so my logical thought process follows the ISO logical process. Whereas when I read a PAS standard, sometimes it's not straightforward reading as all times. No. But the ISO often, as it did with PAS 2060, ISO often catch up. The purpose of a PAS, a publicly available specification, is to be able to respond quickly to industry needs. That's the purpose. ISO standards take a lot longer to develop. So no doubt in time, there may be a ISO equivalent for the PAS 2080, but it is a powerful tool. I've certainly in my experience, it's a powerful tool.
It is, and I think one of the things as well, that organizations can make a massive difference in is what they do with their waste.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you a case study example of a manufacturer here in South Wales that we work with, and they're right up at the top of the valleys, and they get a lot of rain up there, more than we get down on the lowlands in Wales, but we still get enough down here. But they wanted to look at their waste and look at the carbon and the cost of their waste, and we did a project there where we rehashed all their waste supplies, and that ended up reducing their carbon by 92%.
Oh wow! Yeah.
They went from 98% landfill to 100% non-landfill. So 90% was recycled and 10% was waste to energy. And that reduced their cost by 42% as well. So looking at what you're doing with your waste, the client I spoke to you about earlier on, our biggest client, 1.5 billion turnover. If you can imagine a company like that whose emissions from their waste last year was only 150 tons of carbon, whereas the amount of waste they're actually getting rid of, if that all went to landfill, you'd be looking at probably 20 times that amount.
Yeah.
So it can be done, it can be done. And
absolutely.
I think it's a massive area to look at, definitely.
It just makes me drawing things to a close, but the PAS 2080 projects I've looked at, just when you mention waste there, I have seen buildings come down, buildings go up, and the effort to minimize the waste has been fantastic, and it's been to the company's benefit. It's also been to the benefit of greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, I watched the building come down, and then they actually, one of the clients actually spent the time crushing the concrete and recovering the rebar from it, so that they could segregate the rebar and send it off for reprocessing and recycling, and then they would put the recovered concrete through the crusher and use that for the founds for the building, as well as all those other circular economy principles that I mentioned. Even the windows came out of those buildings to be recovered for reuse. You know, they don't just tear a building down, stick it in a skip and take it off to landfill.
Do you know what, Steve? I've watched that exact thing happen less than 500 meters from this office. We used to have one of the largest HMRC offices in the country here.
Okay, yeah.
3,000 people used to work there at one point. Now that's all been demolished over the last 2 years. All the vehicles on site are running on HVO.
Yep.
All the rebar has been pulled out, like you say, and been recycled. All the windows were taken out and recycled. And as the buildings come down, it's all been crushed for aggregate and resold for road building. Yeah. Absolutely phenomenal circular economy going over there. Yeah. Really, really, really good. And to see that happen has been fantastic to watch, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's such change days. You know, this country measures its carbon emissions against, I think it's 1990 baseline. 1990 baseline, yeah. And you know, you and I have both been able to see the progress that has taken place over that period. I think I'm an ever the optimist. I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I'm looking forward to the year ahead in terms of continued greenhouse gas improvements and performance. And yeah, it's been cracking to speak with you. Thank you very much, Huw, and I'm very much Steve, looking forward to talking with you again in the future. All right, listen, thank you very much indeed. Been a pleasure.
Pleasure. Thanks, Steve.